Disruptive attacks that are that can be affect to performance a wireless network. Even though client usually don't like to perform tests that can affect the performance of a network, it is still important to perform those attacks to understand the impact and attacker that could cause the network. So previously we talked about or try to perform some techniques using malicious hacker that would perform. So in this lecture we will be covering two main types of attack. The first type is the man in the middle, which is to intercept and multiply traffic of the user, and the second type that we are going to use is denial of service attack, and there are several techniques that can be used to fully disconnect someone from a wireless name. So the man in the middle, as their name it suggests, is an attack where we force someone traffic to go through a machine. So we can just have the traffic and just modify as we want. So you may be familiar with some of the main man in the middle techniques, such as like as example air poisoning, then some are like wireless, then penetration testing, that will be focusing on a wireless technique to perform man in the middle. So for their attack, this will be using our like online rough access point to intercept the traffic. The idea is intersecting and if dropping the traffic to capture some sensitive data, but we can also use it to block access to specific some resources. For example, to block a user from accessing their mail, or even inject and modify the traffic. So if you really want to get excessive on your testing, you can use this, such as beef, to inject malicious JavaScript into HTTP traffic, etc. like this. The step by step of the attack consists in first creating the rogue access point. As we saw in our previous lectures, connecting the rogue access point is a real network to a real network. How we can use this? So we previously described it. So the user then connect to the rogue access point to a real network, then it drop the traffic with like Wireshark, then it wait for user to before the Wireshark they wait for user to connect. And if you want to modify and inject packet using like two searches, which is MIT MF, but that's optional. So let's talk about non-disruptive types of attack. So what is non-disruptive? So I mean, this is the attack that does not affect the user and that are already connected to their component network, and that takes mainly user to connect to different network, but this will not cause denial service of attack because this is a wireless connection. So the attack covering like non-disturbing attack covering mostly, which is like eavesdropping, to which mainly does is listening to the traffic and trying to capture sensitive information such as password or cookies. The rogue access point is also known for like fake Wi-Fi's, which you then try to load user to connect, and free captive portals, and which you try to lure user to type their password and unveil their password. Pre-engagement phase is where it starts with a client that discover test and with a great timelines. It is important to make clear of the client so that the potential packets of the test get a formal proof of any of the testing service. So you will be performing to bring pre-engagement. Then I also previously talked about pre-engagement, but let's just describe it. So pre-engagement has 5 main goals, and here is this. The first one is already we talked about, which is define a scope. and we will be talking about in our next lectures as well. But basically you want to define what and who will be tested in this engagement. The second phase is related to the collective environment information. So in most cases the client will provide you a list of wireless network that they can try to be in scope and at least of user that can be targeted. But in any cases, as do you remember that you are running your own reconnaissance technique, because in some cases system administrator may be not aware of some as a network in the environment. The third phase is scheduling the test, which is the name as says. It uses schedule a date and test to be performed with the client. The fourth phase is to communicate to stakeholders, which means it inform other affected parties about the upcoming test as a red teaming exercise that include test to a human behavior. So I recommend from only the very necessary people inside the client, for example in front of like CEO and one system administrator. That's because if everybody knows that test will be performed, people will be extra careful of this stage of the test. So we want people to be tested as a normal day. So the last phase is probably the most important, which is getting the client a formal sign off. The difference between a criminal and the professional is the document. So make sure you have it signed before you start any test, any types of test. To define the scope, we need to ask the client which areas of the company they want to be tested, which user can be targeted, how many days of the test we can perform the test, or any types of or any kinds of attack that will be performed. Some of the clients may not be willing to have their wireless network disrupted, so make sure you explain this impact in each of these attack. So the network the demonstrator will not be surprised if a user calls saying that the wireless network isn't stable right now. So as you can imagine, it is important to have a hope while define this user you are not passing. So any critical business areas of this company without any authorization is not suitable. So it's better to just get the permission and get a better idea about what is better for the company.